Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and today I have another Bigfoot encounter that I'd like to share. Here it goes. Hi, Bob. I've had several encounters with Sasquatch in Florida, east of Fort Myers. My first sighting took place around the year 1995, when I was 15 or 16. I had only recently gotten my driver's license, so that's my frame of reference. It was September, rainy, and a humid 75 degrees, about 11 a.m., I think. I was on a mountain bike trail near a small lake. I don't bike anymore, for reasons that will become apparent later on. The trail was technically closed, because much of it had washed out and flooded. But this is America, after all, and they can't just close land, so I was on it anyway. Sasquatch was not on my mind in any way, shape, or form. I was coming down the path to an area where a strip of brush had been cleared by a controlled burn, probably the previous summer. Something, I'm still not sure what, caught my eye to the right, about where this strip of ashy and charred scrub ended. I saw a stump. A strange stump, and I looked right at it as I rolled out of sight. I was at most 35 feet away, not far. Now here's the weird thing. Even though I noticed it as I went by, it took me a few minutes to register that I had even seen anything strange. It wasn't until a couple minutes later that it really struck me that the weird stump didn't seem like a stump. And so I stopped, and this is hard to explain, but I was almost more curious about why I ignored the thing, more so than I was about what it actually was. And I know how weird that must sound, but I wasn't thinking, what was that? I was thinking, why did I just keep going? Why did I assume it was a stump at all? Because it sure didn't look like one. Well, it did look like one, but it still pretty obviously wasn't. And as I stood there, I decided that whatever it was definitely wasn't a stump. So I turned around, and I'm not really sure what I expected to find. I was half thinking I'd find a stump that from a certain angle looked ridiculously human, but I also suspected that there was more to it than that, because my heart was thumping. My adrenaline wouldn't have skyrocketed if I actually thought I was looking for a stump. And it wasn't until I started approaching the area that I saw the thing that I even realized how nervous I was. Dare I say, I was even scared, which was pretty odd for me, because BMX was my favorite thing, and I'd never been scared before on the paths. And I suppose I wouldn't have been nervous had I really expected to find a stump. Due to due diligence and curiosity, I went down the trail once more as I had the first time, because I thought maybe there's a chance that the angle had to be precise to see it. As in, when I came from the opposite direction, the shadows didn't align or something, though there hadn't been much sun to speak of. But that didn't help. There was nothing. And as you probably expected me to say, the stump, or whatever it was that I saw, was gone. And I'm fairly certain I pinpointed where it had been, maybe 30 feet off the trail. I rode back and forth on that 200 feet of dirt at least a dozen times, and I was becoming desperate to see it. It's hard to explain. And when I finally concluded definitively that I saw something that was no longer there, I guess my nerves got the better of me, and I pedaled back to my car at the trailhead. To be clear, I wasn't thinking Sasquatch at all at this point. The best I can summarize this first sighting is that I briefly, but surprisingly clearly, saw something human-shaped, but perfectly camouflaged, and it looked conscious and aware of its environment, and aware of me. And by the time I realized it, it was gone. And another thing I'd like to clear up about this, it was quite some time before I associated this sighting as Bigfoot at all. I remember thinking it was more like a giant person, maybe more in the realm of a spirit than a creature. At the time, this went down in my head as just one of the strange things that many people experience in the woods. It's difficult to convey what I saw. It didn't look like a hunter in a ghillie suit, because the most prominent part was the face, which is the opposite of what a ghillie suit seeks to do. And I almost want to say that the face tracked me, but maybe that's just how I interpreted the expression, like how they say the Mona Lisa is so brilliant because it follows you around the room, no matter your angle. And the hair, though long and scraggly, was very wood-like, if that makes any sense. It wasn't like grass, it was like the texture of a tree. It looked more like a bushel of kindling than yarn. And dark, like a charred stump. No, I didn't go to the spot where I saw the thing. I don't want to say I was too scared. I think I would have walked there for $1. It's more like it hadn't occurred to me. I don't know, that sounds strange typing it out, but all the same, it didn't seem necessary at the time. But looking back, I wish I had. I think the thing that bothers me the most about it, or at least what makes this encounter so strange, or maybe even just the memory so strange, is that I can't even remember exactly what it looked like. When I was going back and forth on the trail searching for it, part of me was certainly trying to prove to myself that I hadn't seen anything, and yet the other part of me really, really wanted to see it again. And I don't know if I can't recall what it looked like because I only had the impression of something, or for reasons unknown. But it seems odd to recognize that I saw something, even though I can't really say what. But I know this: it wasn't a tree, because it was gone. My next experience happened 5 years later, and I kind of have to fill you in on something first. Shortly after my first sighting, I started to get migraines. Bad migraines. They're absolutely terrible. It's a sharp pain right above my temples. But even worse than the pain is the light sensitivity. And this has always been difficult to explain. One of those things that people can't relate to, so they assume I'm either lying or exaggerating. But I'm not. I am photophobic, and it's a real thing. Not only is light obnoxiously bright, but looking at light makes me feel like there are baseballs wedged in my eye sockets, pressing against my eyeballs and cheekbones. I've tried all sorts of meds. None of them did diddly. I have migraines more often than not, but I can manage them fine so long as I can avoid light. My migraines and photophobia have kind of shaped my whole life. That sounds sad, but I don't really mean it that way. I work from home, in IT, and obviously I can work nights. I almost always sleep when the sun is up, and if the sun is bright, I'm behind thick curtains. I was a programmer back in the glory days, back when it was all super novel. I've done pretty well for myself, so I have no complaints. And fortunately, the human body is resilient and adaptive, and the mind is too. I can't even tell you how many people in my life have looked at my work monitor and have marveled that I can even see it, because I keep the brightness setting so low. I use a lot of Christmas lights in my condo, because lots of little lights are easier on my eyes than one big light. I can see in the dark far better than anyone I've ever met. Not to sound juvenile, but I kind of like to pretend it's like a little superpower. I've had multiple people over to my place for various reasons over the years, and I can tell by the way they move that they can barely see, whereas I can see just fine. I'm kind of proud of that. It's important to find the silver linings in life. It's not exactly superhero caliber stuff, but it's fun. Long story short, I'm nocturnal. I sleep during the day, and I do my activity at night. Ironically, I considered moving to the Pacific Northwest for the longest time because it's overcast. Maybe I'm a masochist for living in the Sunshine State, but I rather like my inverted lifestyle. Anyway, all of that just to say, I can see pretty well in the dark, and I'm up and about at times when most people are not. My second encounter occurred when I was 21. I was going for a walk on a night that wasn't particularly dark. It was late August, and probably around 2 in the morning, which is after lunch for me. I was walking along the Caloosahatchee River when I heard something in the water. A splash. It was large, but controlled, and then I heard consistent water disturbances, like that of stroking, or even kayak paddling. I had been walking for almost an hour, so my ears were good and honed, and I was in the habit of taking this particular path a couple times a week, and I had for many years. I was very accustomed to the nighttime sounds and sights, and this rhythmic splashing noise immediately struck me as strange, so I stopped to look. Some nights I jogged, and on those nights I wore headphones, and had that been the case on this particular night, I likely never would have noticed anything amiss. I looked out into the river, and I could make out a disturbance in the water, coming from the opposite shore, heading to the side I was on, and it was coming at a diagonal, as in, not straight across the water. Coincidentally, I hope, it probably would have reached the bank at about the same time and place that I would have, had I kept walking. It obviously wasn't an alligator. It came far too high out of the water, and there was no point to the snout. No snout at all, in fact. This basically rules out just about everything I usually see in the water. Birds, gators, beavers, muskrats, deer. They all really have a cruising speed. They don't move, come to a halt, and then move again. Based not only on what I was seeing, but on the sound I was hearing. This thing was doing what I would call a breaststroke. I heard the sound of a stroke and it would move forward, and then it would go still for a long second, and then repeat. It bobbed and rose and fell with each stroke, and there was no disturbance to indicate leg movement. No, I have no idea specifically how deep the river is, but it's pretty deep. All things considered, I could see the head pretty well, or at least, what I interpreted as the head. It was round and large. It had no snout and no ears that I could make out, but I couldn't see much detail. No facial features to speak of, though I could make out its general shape. and it seemed human-like. The arms, or forelimbs, broke the water only slightly, because of course, they were mostly underwater. And though the part of it I could see wasn't that large, generally speaking, I had the distinct impression that there was a great deal more of it underwater, because it was much larger than a person in a similar position, at least double the size of a person. Honestly, it seemed very human-like to me, just like how a person does a breaststroke. And this may sound like a weird distinction, but I spend a lot of time at the pool, and it even sounded like how an elderly person does a breaststroke. And the head, which was about all I could see, generally looked human-like, and though I'm inclined to say it was much larger than a person, I recognize that estimating size is notoriously difficult in water. Other than a person, the only other two options that I can think of would be a bear or a panther, and frankly, it seemed too large to be either of them, and I think I would have made out the ears and snout of a bear, and even the ears of a mountain lion, and it was way too big to be a cougar, and likely too big to be a bear. It definitely wasn't a deer. They have snouts, but more importantly, they can't swim with broad strokes. They keep a rapid pace. No, it definitely wasn't a manatee. A manatee can't breach that far out of the water, especially for such a long time. And besides, it was definitely propelling itself with strokes from its arms, which extended far in front of its head, something that no marine mammal that I'm aware of can do. Now, this may sound strange, assuming you're a normal day-inhabiting person, but I felt it was very important to not be seen, and to be fair, that may have simply been out of habit. I frequent places that close after sunset, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen police headlights or something, and I simply duck into the shadows until they pass. But this was different. I felt like this thing didn't want to be seen, or perhaps more accurately, like I was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to see. Something that wasn't supposed to be seen. I don't know, but I stopped walking and watched, even though I felt like I should immediately leave. But I was in a bit of a jam. My car was parked on the side of the road, because the parking lot, of course, was closed, and I was only 10 or 15 minutes away from my car at a jog. But that's only if I walked right past where the thing was going to make landfall. On the other hand, if I walked the opposite way, it would take far longer, and assuming the thing kept walking north, I might have run right into it that way too. And that thought petrified me. Despite my curiosity, I really didn't want to see more, and I really just wanted to get away from it. I decided to go back down the trail the way I came, away from where the swimming thing would make landfall. Initially, I had planned to wait far away, and then resume the route as planned, once I was confident that it had kept going. But I think something about being still, being inactive, freaked me out, and I just continued the loop. And I've never been more scared in the woods in my life. Assuming it was walking quickly, it should have been well clear of me by the time I intersected its route. But here's the thing, and probably why I found the whole thing so disturbing. It took its sweet time crossing the river. It didn't cross at the narrowest point, and it didn't go in the straightest direction. It made no attempt to minimize its time in the river. If it decided to just mosey through the woods, as it had in the water, with my luck, I'd intercept it exactly. But I didn't care at that moment. I just wanted to get back to my car. And let me tell you, the thought of taking a relaxed, or at least a not hurried swim across the Caloosahatchee River at night gives me literal chills to this day, between the alligators and the bull sharks. Whatever it was either had nerves of steel, was stupid, or was extremely confident in its own strength. Fortunately, I was carrying that night. I usually don't. And that did, in fact, make me feel better. I wouldn't have used it unless I was quite certain my life was being threatened. Even if it meant proving something new to the world, I wouldn't have used it. You often hear people say, my firearm is for people, not animals. But not me. I'm in pretty good shape, or at least I was back then. And I've always supposed that anyone out there at night would be more scared of me than I would be of them. I've never really had any trouble with tweakers, and I'm not scared of them. But our habitats don't really overlap. I am far more afraid of bears and panthers than I am of people. Bear attacks are extremely rare in Florida, and I don't think there have been any fatal ones in my lifetime, and I don't think there have been any cougar attacks on record at all. So yes, they're extremely rare, but so is going on nature walks at 2 a.m., when these animals are not accustomed to encountering humans, and that's why I carry. It makes sense to me that the predators would be more bold at night, because that's when they know we're not around. I say all that, but I've never had a problem with either of them. In fact, I've never even seen either of them, though I'm pretty sure I've heard bears more than once. I carry a 10mm, and I'm fairly confident I could blast either of them if one ever got a hold of me, even a gator, but I never linger by the banks. So I kept walking, probably more because of nerves than anything else, but I forced myself to keep a steady walking pace. I figured that being observant and appearing confident would do far more than speed, seeing as I couldn't even know how fast it was going, and the woods were far more quiet than normal, though I blame the adrenaline for that. People often attribute the eerie quietness to the paranormal or something, but adrenaline sharpens your ears and nullifies ambient noise. It's a prey response that makes it easier for you to make out anomalies, and my adrenaline had spiked like never before. Fortuitously, I made it back to my car with nothing out of the ordinary occurring, but that was the first night in a long while that I was afraid of the dark. My third and final encounter was only a couple of years ago. It's the least definitive, and also the least interesting, I guess you could say. But I was driving just before dawn on 31, going north, and I saw a large black figure disappear into the foliage to my left. I really have no detail to speak of, other than it was dark and hairy, but the reason I believe it was a Sasquatch is because of how tall it was. It was at least 7 feet tall. The foliage was still swaying as I drove past. And frankly, and if what I saw was indeed 7 or 8 feet tall, well, that rules out just about everything. In a previous video of yours, the one about the Bigfoot witness in Georgia, you mentioned that he wasn't even remotely surprised by one of his later encounters, and that's exactly how I felt about this shadow I saw lurch into the palmettos. I know there's something out there, and since I'm up and about when most people aren't, I feel like the odds of me seeing it are higher than everyone else's, even if only by a hair. Seriously, the denial, or maybe the blissful and willful ignorance about this topic is insane. I have an elderly neighbor who might be the sweetest person I've ever met. She knows all about my eye condition and inversed lifestyle, and we only met at all because she's the only person I encounter in the complex who's already poking around before the sun comes up. One time I got back from the gym. It was about 4 a.m., and she insisted that I come over for food, which I would never say no to, but especially with her because I suspect that she's lonely. So I said, okay, let me go shower first. I think she had correctly intuited my horrible bachelor diet. It turns out that she made an absolutely delicious pot roast, and it was so considerate of her to realize that 5 a.m. was my dinner. So she didn't make breakfast. That was a big deal to me. My friends always want to get breakfast with me at that hour, which is fine. It was just nice that someone noticed. Anyway, she once told me to be careful when I'm outside at night because a chimpanzee escaped from a nearby animal sanctuary, and I told her I hadn't heard about that, and she said she hadn't either, but she and a bunch of her girlfriends saw it on their way back from the golf club. She said it was 10 feet tall. I mean really, 10 feet tall, and she thought it was a chimpanzee. I know in your video about the skunk ape photos, you expressed some skepticism that anyone could actually think that the thing in the photo is an orangutan. Well, I literally know a grown woman who believes she saw a 10-foot-tall chimpanzee and didn't call anyone about it, or tell anyone in any official capacity. Sure, I'll answer some questions. Regarding my first sighting, I said, something, I'm still not sure what, caught my eye to the right. How can I be sure what I saw? I saw it out of the periphery of my vision, and only for a second or two, but I'm still confident about what I saw. The level in which this thing looked like a stump was just incredible, unbelievable. It looked like a burnt-out stump. I wouldn't have been surprised to find a stump there, but of course there hadn't been one. The weirdest thing, I suppose, is that the shape gave it away. Even though it looked like debris, it seemed like it was looking at me, and tracking me as I went down the trail. Question number 2. At first I said I was scared, but then I said I wasn't scared, and that I'd have gone to the spot I saw the thing for $1. Can I say a little bit more about that? I suppose that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? For reasons unclear to me, I wasn't scared of the large human-shaped creature, believe it or not. I was scared of how my brain didn't register it until later. Does that make sense? It's like if you're walking down the street and you see a gold ring and a $100 bill on the sidewalk. Then after walking 2 more blocks, you go, maybe I should have picked that up. Why didn't I pick that up? All I literally had to do was slow my bike, or even just turn my head, and all of this would have been solved. For me, at least. But it didn't occur to me to even be curious until I was half a mile away. I felt not in control of my faculties, though I don't think I could have articulated that that's how I felt at the time. Question number 3. I said that the most bothersome part of my first sighting is how I can't even remember what it looks like. How can I give such an accurate description if I can't even remember how it looks? Well, I saw enough to know what it wasn't, but not enough to know what it was, I guess. But I think there's more to it. For example, my grandma died when I was 7. I have many fond memories of her, but I can't honestly recall what she looked like. I think my brain has replaced her image with pictures of her that were in my house, or maybe even the overall vibe. Maybe I remember the vibe more than the likeness, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that I have no idea what she looks like, because obviously I do, but I'm just saying that my memories from when I was 6 are probably quite different from what she actually looked like. If I could go back in time now to when I was 6 and see my grandma, I bet she would look a lot different than how I remember her. Generally speaking, our brains and the data stored within are not set in stone. They're not cut and dry. Memories are malleable and subject to corrosion, distortion, and decay. Not intrinsically in a negative way either. So as for the creature, I think it was particularly tricky because my brain didn't have a point of connection to anchor to. If you see a dog on the street, you immediately have thousands of comparisons to draw because you've seen so many dogs before. Even if you can't tell the breed, you can tell what breed it's like. Whatever I saw on the bike path that day, I have no comparisons to. Just a camouflaged giant person. Question 4. Do I think there was more to it than just camouflage? Yes, and I don't really want to say anything more about it. Question 5. I said that my migraine and light sensitivity condition started right after my sighting. Do I think it started because of what I saw? As a general rule, I believe everything in life is related, but maybe not directly in this instance. I always had headaches in that area, and it wasn't until my late teens that it became hard to deal with, though it very well could simply have been that the pain was easier to ignore or easier to deal with when I was younger. So no, I don't think my migraines are related to my sighting. And yet, I don't think any one event of a person's life can be looked at in a vacuum, so who knows? Question 6. Am I a vampire? I wish. Question 7. Regarding the swimming creature, I said it sounded very person-like an elderly person doing the breaststroke. How do I know it wasn't? It was too big, and no one in their right mind would swim alone at 2 a.m. there. I don't think. What would I say to all the people who are going to say that I just saw a bear swimming across a river? It didn't look like a bear. None of my sightings looked like a bear. And honestly, I've never seen a bear in the wild before, but I think I saw whatever this was before. In describing my second encounter, I seemed certain that I would cross paths with the swimming thing. Why? I don't know. Maybe just expecting the worst-case scenario. I said I wouldn't have used my firearm unless I was sure that my life was in danger. I said, even if it meant proving something new to the world, I wouldn't have used it. Why? I prefer mystery. I really do. I don't think I'd offer evidence to the scientists even if I found it. These things don't want to be known, and I don't blame them. Do I think I saw something that can be shot and killed? Something flesh and blood? I think so. Yes. Okay, hi, back to me. I'm still not exactly sure what to make about the undeniable trend that people who see these things once tend to see them again. Is it psychological? As in, now that they know what there is to see, they are more accepting of seeing it, whether they actually do or not. Is it nerves? Surely seeing something like this might make a person more edgy, more willing to interpret something that isn't as something that is. For example, if I was startled by a bear in the woods, from then on, I'd expect that I'd see many bears that weren't. My gut tells me that it's merely a location or habit thing. Like if you see a Sasquatch once, then you see one a year later. That just tells me that you're in a good spot, or out at a good time. It tells me not only that there are Sasquatch around, but that they have their guard down for whatever reason. Some people would attribute this trend to the fact that people who lie tend to lie more than once. And of course, many would have entirely separate explanations, and I'm not sure how I feel about those. It's a path I don't particularly want to go down, but there's still time to change the road you're on. I do think that having a nocturnal routine, for whatever the reason may be, significantly raises your chances of seeing these things. And perhaps in contradiction to that statement, I don't even think Sasquatch are inherently nocturnal. I think they just do whatever they gotta do to survive and thrive in whatever area they inhabit, as all organisms must. So if their lives are made easier by being active at night, then you better believe that that's exactly what they're going to do. But my favorite thing about this man's report is that it is such a good example of how this topic is simultaneously the best and worst kept secret in the world. On one hand, the secret is kept well because it's a myth, and on the other hand, people see these things all the time. He personally had 3 Sasquatch sightings, and openly admits to never having seen a bear. Whispers of these things go back as far as any record has any right to go, and yet he has a neighbor who, along with a convoy, thinks she saw a 10-foot-tall chimpanzee. And perhaps most importantly, don't forget that for every report like this, there are not hundreds more, but thousands more like it, and only a sliver of them ever get reported, and virtually nothing is done about those reports. So perhaps the question isn't, how long can something like this remain hidden? Perhaps the question is, if it can be mistaken for a 10-foot-tall chimp, how hidden does it really need to be? Anyway, please make sure to like this video, because that helps me tremendously. Subscribe for soon-to-come content. And as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.